Welcome to another CAMS 1103 lecture. I'm Roger Travis. Name that tune in the contest forum for a little prize, and enjoy the lecture.
In this lecture, I'll be introducing you to Ovid's enormous, mostly fun, and very irreverent and unusual take on classical mythology, the Metamorphoses. In keeping with my focus in this course on the way that myth is very much about the people who are telling the myths at the times when the myths are being told, and because we do, in fact, unlike a lot of the myths that get told before classical Athens comes along, and then during the course of classical Athens even, where we don't have a lot of historical data about exactly what the context is of the myths as the myth makers are telling them, because we do, in the case of Ovid, have some really good historical data about what's going on when Ovid is writing the Metamorphoses. I'm going to spend some time here at the start introducing you to that period, and in particular to what we know of Ovid's career. And what's great about Ovid is that unlike the Homeric bards, unlike even our tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, with Ovid we really do know how his career went, and we know about some really interesting historical relationships between what's going on in his career, what he's writing from a mythological standpoint, and what's going on in the Rome around him. So unlike Homer, Ovid is in fact a real person. His full Roman name was Publius Ovidius Naso. That last part, strangely enough, means nose. And he spent the majority of his working life in Rome, which at the time was the center of the political world, if not quite the center of the literary world, because Alexandria still had some claim to being that. But during Ovid's time, the Roman poets had gradually taken over from the Alexandrian poets and were working on their own kind of development of what had been going on at the Museion in Alexandria. And here we're making the connection with what I was saying in the end of the Odyssey lecture about Aristarchus and about the way the classical tradition takes shape in Alexandria. At any rate, like a lot of people who became important in Rome, he was born outside of Rome, somewhere in the empire. He was born at Sulmo in Italy, and in his youth was brought to Rome to be educated, as many young citizens of the Roman Empire who had the money and resources to do this were, and he received a full education, especially in what we know as rhetoric, because rhetoric was the substance of Roman education at the time, as it really had been in Greece before Rome. Rhetoric was what you learned, the art of speaking, in order to become a full participant in politics and to take your place, as it was thought of, within the culture, to become a senator, to fulfill the various offices that you were supposed to fulfill as a noble Roman. And just to spoil the end of his story, Ovid dies in 17 CE, that is 3 years after the Emperor Augustus, whom we're going to talk about a lot as we talk about Ovid, in exile. And he's exiled probably around 8 CE, spends the rest of his life in Bithynia on the Black Sea, a place he seems, unless he's joking about this, to have really hated. And the reason for his exile remains mysterious, but it clearly has a lot to do with pissing off the Emperor Augustus in some important way. So now we get to move to talking about Augustus, because Ovid's life, and I think the shape of the Metamorphoses, is fundamentally affected by what must have been a confrontation between Ovid and Augustus. Ovid tells us in some of his poetry from exile that the reason for his exile is a carmen and an error. The error is the more mysterious thing. The carmen is pretty clearly a work called the Ars Amatoria, the art of the lover. Now I'm going to be talking about where the Ars Amatoria fits into Ovid's career in just a moment, but I need to spend a few seconds on Augustus and why it would be that Augustus would get so unhappy about a work called The Art of the Lover. As we'll talk about more fully down the road in this course, Augustus comes to power at the end of a horrible time for Rome, the end of a civil war that Augustus's adoptive father, Julius Caesar, has won against his rival Pompey, but which is then kind of swept away, but whose rule is then swept away in the famous assassination in 44 BCE. You may have heard et tu, Brute, he says to one of his killers, Brutus. Brutus and his compatriots fight against Mark Antony and Octavian. That is the young Augustus. There is then a period when Mark Antony and Octavian are falling out. You'll know about this partly from the HBO series Rome. In any case, this ends badly for Antony and his consort Cleopatra in a huge battle, the Battle of Actium, which leads directly to Augustus assuming the title of Princeps, which pretty much just means chief, but it really makes him emperor, and it's a title he holds from 27 BCE until his death in 14 CE. All of that is just to set up the fact that Augustus felt very strongly that he had to do something to change Roman culture, because Roman culture was on this disastrous course where the empire was completely ungovernable. People were thinking only about their own gain and not about the good of the empire or about the good of the upper-class Romans who were ruling the empire. And so Augustus, among very many other things, decided that he was going to try to change the way that Roman families worked through the law. And this is what earns the title that I am going to be giving him flippantly, mostly, throughout the course of being a fascist. Probably the best example of what Augustus wanted to do is found in his criminalization of adultery and in the way that he establishes financial penalties for upper-class Romans who fail to marry and have a sufficient number of children. Augustus is clearly interested in continuing the upper classes of Rome, stopping the fall in their birth rates, and by that means somehow bringing together the aristocratic culture that he thinks is going to be best for Rome. It's in that context that a literary work called The Art of the Lover, as we'll see in our next segment, is going to be a problem both for Augustus and then, because it's a problem for Augustus, for the guy who wrote it.